Well, it won the Twitter poll, so this week it's time to go over to Marvel with Moon Knight. And yes, I've seen the D Plus show and it's pretty good. I'll eventually start making vlogs or something about all the D Plus as well as previous stuff, but that's an eventuality. Hey, donate and it'll happen sooner. Anyways, yes, this week is Moon Knight. And for a bit of disclosure, Moon Knight, Hawkeye, and Cloak and Dagger are the three characters in all of comics history that I have every solo and appearance of. I do have the entirety of Warlord, but he didn't cross over all that much. But yes, I love the character. And that means I may never actually talk about the D Plus show without provocation. But first, as is my wont and love, today on Supporting the Indie Scene, some people may not be surprised about which Kickstarter this is going to be about. In a sequel plug off of the failed audio-only first issue's attempted revival that didn't actually come out because of my producer, I'm still extremely excited about this. Slice of Life number 2's Kickstarter is live today. Slice of Life is a webtoon being transferred into the physical comic book format with a great grand Kickstarter. Kat Calamia, or Calamity Cat, which absolutely no one calls her, but autocorrect did make me giggle here. And Phil Falco, and if you've been here longer than a month, then you've already heard me gush about the By Visibility anthology they put together, or about Like Father, Like Daughter, or The Haunting, or the sequel to By Visibility, which should be coming up soon, as well as a sort of thing they're doing about hair, which is also looking for people, so look over on that. They are a top-tier indie creator team. But anyway, Slice of Life. Valeria Piri's art is absolutely fantastic paired with the premise of this webcomic. Since the plot is essentially a badass anime protagonist, Lady Vengeance, gets reverse isekai'd into the real world and falls in love with a high school cheerleader. The art pops that anime feel, and the writing is very much in the vein of a good slice of life, where there's drama but also lighthearted moments, and it is a total fantastic, even if you want to binge it. So just having it in physical with all the bells and whistles I enjoy far more than I should is something that everyone should want. Yes, that means you at home should want this. So go over to Kickstarter now and look up Slice of Life number 2, launched by Kat Calamia, or check out their Twitters at ComicUno, that's COMICUNO, or Phil's over at Phil Falco Wright. It's also in the description below, or on my own Twitter. And yes, if you do support this, tell them you found it through me, because it's part of my secret plot to make everyone do hollow foil covers again. And with that, let's get to the show proper with that title history on Moon Knight. Moon Knight was created for Werewolf by Night number 32 in August of 1975, created by Doug Moench and Don Perlin, to be a moon-themed mercenary to fight the werewolf lead. Essentially, he was just a costume nutter with silver weapons and a moon gimmick. Basically Batman, but he got a hold of the bleach. But then, in the next issue, he realized that Jack Russell, the Werewolf by Night, was not a monster, but rather a victim. So he became a good guy and turned against the committee that hired him to help Jack. Even then, editors Marv Wolfman and Len Wein liked the character so much, they gave him a solo story in Marvel Spotlight number 28 and 29, also written by Moench and art by Perlin. It was this appearance in 1976 that cemented him as a real hero, but he'd get much more attention in The Defenders number 47 through 51, where he would team up with the Defenders to help combat the Zodiac Cartel. Yes, ultimately, him working for the bad guys was retconned into being undercover work, and he would also appear in Peter Parker, The Spectacular Spider-Man number 22 through 23, written by Bill Mantlo. Then in 79, he teamed up with The Thing in Marvel 2-in-1 number 5, which is where I think he got onto Ben Grimm's Hanukkah card list, even though Mark Spector has been lapsed for some time. The most important leap for the character, though, before his solo series anyways, would be in several backup stories of the Rampaging Hulk, or Hulk Magazine, depending on who you want to talk to about it, between issues 11 through 15, 17, 18, and 20, during 1977 and 78, because this gave him a general origin story, which we may get into if it's not in either of his first issues, but it is, so we probably won't. But more importantly, Bill Sienkiewicz, I probably butcher that name, drew him in the style of Neil Adams' Batman. It's the definitive look for Moon Knight for a very long time, even though, I'll be honest, I never knew Bill could do such crisp, traditional line work. Dude scared me with the bear from New Mutants for far too long for me to think of him as a traditional, albeit great, artist. And speaking of Bill, God, I butchered his last name, he's the artist on Moon Knight Volume 1, Number 1, with Doug Moench writing. It will give the official origin of Mark Spector, as well as laying out some key supporting characters, but I'll leave something to talk about in the then, because while we know now that he is in fact the Fist of Khonshu, and crazy with multiple personalities, back when he started, it was a bit more of a, is he just insane, or did he actually see a god? This series ran for 38 issues, and it was a great seller that would become a Marvel flagship book, in fact. Though Volume 1 ended in 1984, that was so it could be relaunched with a brand new 6-issue miniseries the following year. Alan Zelenetz, the writer of the end of Volume 1, brings their retooling of the character with a stronger supernatural connection, like Phases of the Moon changing his strength, a cool new gold trim, and of course, all the Egyptian Batman gadgets that would be taken away after Marvel started to dislike the comparison. After that miniseries, he would join the West Coast Avengers, written by Stephen Englehart, from issues 21 through 41. This was actually where I first saw the character personally, and absolutely fell in love, complete with a Halloween costume, which was me essentially just wearing a sheet. I'm really glad that there isn't a picture because I'm sure it looks less like Moon Knight and more like My Little Klansman. Joking aside, Moon Knight would be an addition to the roster that would create a great gray area amongst the team, especially when certain Mockingbird stories would happen that would divide the team. And yes, I always steal Alton Brown's catchphrase when I do something like that, but that's another show. I'll admit I was a bit upset when John Byrne took over the West Coast Wackos and wrote Moon Knight off the team. However, the same month he last appeared in West Coast Avengers, that aligned with the start of his next solo ongoing, February 1989. Chuck Dixon would take over the helm for this new ongoing, and it was surprisingly tight. It ran until issue 60 in 1994, with Terry Kavanagh as writer in the end, and Mark Spector seemingly dead. A couple of years later, Moon Knight Volume 3 would debut in 1998, with Doug Moench back as writer for the character. Volume 3, Resurrection War, is a 4-part miniseries to, well, resurrect Mark Spector and show a much darker lean to the character, as was Marvel at the time. You can really see Doug Moench's bat love showing throughout this, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing when he also does make Khonshu a bit more of a badass god. Naturally, that miniseries led to Volume 4, which was another miniseries. Although I will say I don't know exactly what to call it. The covers say that it's High Strangers, but the issues themselves are titled High Strangeness. Doesn't really matter. He wouldn't get his own solo series next until 2006. This new ongoing, written by Charlie Huston, would go until 2009, and it would update Moon Knight's history, making him a Gulf War vet with a lot of pill issues, rather than a Vietnam vet. Yeah, that was happening a lot in the 2000s, which is a show unto itself because the sliding timescale of Marvel has always been a bit troubling. Either way, it ran until 2009 with issue number 30. And like many of his previous runs, this was ended to create another ongoing in 2009, for the title Vengeance of the Moon Knight. However, that series would only run until issue 10, with the Heroic Age tie-in that bring Moon Knight onto his next big team, the Secret Avengers. Heroic Age was a banner for a lot of Marvel books after the end of the Dark Reign. Essentially, it was their way of saying we're returning to a bit brighter status quo to try and ease a lot of the massive earth-shaking that had happened in the 2000s. He would become a regular member of the Ed Brubaker written Secret Avengers. He'd be a mainstay until issue 21, so he could once again get his own series. Officially Volume 6, Brian Michael Bendis decided to bring the character back to having multiple personalities, except instead of the ones that he had, and I know I should have brought those up sooner, now they're imitations of Wolverine, Spider-Man, and Captain America. Yes, really. The series didn't exactly do well, and was cancelled after 12 issues. Then, in 2014, Marvel Now happened, and Moon Knight would once again get his own book, starting off with Warren Ellis as writer. It was actually a shockingly popular book looking back at it, and even the Mr. Knight, Dapper Rorschach-looking side would become a modern classic and iconic in its own right. This series would run for 17 issues, until Marvel did what Marvel did a lot during the 2010s, and another line relaunch with the all-new, all-different banner. So in 2016, it was relaunched again, this time with Jeff Lemire on point. That also once again changed up the whole identity crisis that Mark Spector, or Steve Grant, or Jake Loxley, or whoever is his original identity anymore, as a legitimate mental disorder that he had longer than when Khonshu resurrected him to be his fist. While it isn't technically a relaunch, Marvel would have their next initiative be Marvel Legacy, which would change the numbering of a lot of comics to a legacy number. So, issue 15 of this 2016 run became an amalgam of all the previous volumes, and they tried calling it Moon Knight Volume 1, number 188. Yeah, that is a bit confusing, but hey, it's Marvel, so while this volume would officially end after 26 issues, it would technically end with Moon Knight Volume 1, number 200 in 2018. After that, there was an Avengers storyline in number 33 through 38 in 2020, where Khonshu decided to try and take over the world, and Moon Knight is his right-hand man. The age of Khonshu wasn't too bad, I guess. However, all of that brings us to 2021, and Moon Knight Volume 9. And yes, it goes back to being issue number 1, because Marvel Legacy was just a gimmick, and the number 1s still sell better. It is currently ongoing, and the one we are going to be looking at for the Now section, because obviously Jed MacKay is still knocking it out of the park with issue 10 having just come out. Nah, I don't know. We'll see what happens when I review the Now for comparison. Yeah. And of course, before someone says anything, there's also the Moon Knight Black, White, and Blood anthology that is just different writers' takes on stories with Moon Knight. It is also good. And then there's that D+ show. But enough about the title history. It is time to travel to the Then. The Then is from 1980. Written by Doug Moench, art by Bill Sienkiewicz, with Frankie S. assisting on inks, which Marvel Database says is Frank Singer, though I'll admit that I assumed it was Bill's then-wife, Frankie, since it's spelled the same way and it's labeled there as Bill and Frankie S. So, oops. Colors by Bob Sharon, and letters by Tom Orzechowski. We begin in the past, in the Sudan, where a band of mercenaries led by Raoul Bushman and Mark Spector massacres a rebel camp. And between Bushman and Mark, we get that age-old good guy mercenary trope. You know, Mark's not a butcher. He doesn't like reveling in the kill like Bushman does. He's just a professional soldier. It's a trope I hate. Unlike being stuck in a retail position or even the George Bailey, I can't escape my hometown kind of thing from It's a Wonderful Life, mercenarying and being a soldier of fortune is not a job that you can get stuck in. You actively have to want to be in this sort of line of work. After that little mope session from Mark, Frenchie Duchamp shows up to reveal some secret papers that show Bushman's a bad guy, as if he was hiding his bloodthirsty mercenary nature at all of the appearance we've seen him for the past, 2 pages. So anyways, they have new orders, and they are going to go loot the town of Salima. No rebel resistance, no real strategic reason for it, literally just to loot it. I think I've played this D&D campaign before. So, naturally, that night, they attack the helpless town. Meanwhile, at the heart of the town, Marlene and her father, archaeologist Dr. Peter Allron, are there, with the good doctor taking one of the knives he uncovered during their archaeology-ness to kill the legendary Bushman and stop his evil. However, Mark Spector is a loyally stupid good guy Mark, and he saves Bushman from assassination by stopping Peter with one solid pow. To make an example of the old man, Bushman grabs him by the neck and then sinks his steel teeth into the doctor's neck. The sad part being is that even in the narration, this isn't the first time that Mark has seen this. He actively chooses to be here. Now, he does show compassion for Peter, though, and holds him to hear about his daughter still in town and Mark totally needs to save her. Mark then races over to Marlene to tell her that she needs to get going. She chooses not to until he's like, I killed your father, next I'll kill you, now go. And she goes. But Bushman does see this act of compassion, but is surprisingly blasé about it, and tells him to go get some men to grab the gold and melt it down. Because clearly Bushman doesn't know the price of black market antiquities at his local Hobby Lobby. Frenchie then arrives because he and Mark were gonna flee. However, Bushman orders his men to execute all the local villagers, and they do. This is the final straw that means Mark finally grows a set and takes a swing at Bushman. But Bushman is better, knocking him out with one heck of a haymaker. Bushman then tells his men to drag Mark into the desert and leave him for dead. And so, hours later, Mark wakes up and begins to wander the desert. That night, in a sandstorm, he stumbles upon a secret tribe and is brought into the tomb of the pharaoh Seti. In the tomb, there's another white person in with this tribe, Marlene. Of course, that doesn't really matter at all because Mark Spector is dead! Now, Marlene has her chance to be melodramatic because she flip-flops to the, good, he killed my dad, he deserves to be dead, to now being, oh, but he saved me and he's kinda handsome. Yet, as she's crying, the sandstorm rages outside, and the eyes of Khonshu flicker in the torchlight. Suddenly, Mark Spector bolts up, living again! And he does what any recently dead do. He steals the hood off the god statue and leaves to take his revenge. And he does it in the most Assassin's Creed-y way possible. That is, until he turns into me playing Hitman and just starts throwing some grenades to clear the rest of the men out. So that way he can have a one-on-one with Bushman. No, of course not, because Marlene actually followed Mark to the hideout, and a hand reaches out from the shadows to grab her, who also is in the shadows. She screams, distracting Mark, who races over to save her. So Bushman scampers off to become, well, the main recurring antagonist for Moon Knight for a little bit. Now, if I were Mark, I'd be pissed off as hell, because the guy that grabbed her was Frenchie. So now, the three of them can become the human side of the Vengeance of the Moon. The legwork, as it were. But it doesn't stop there. To complete this origin story, how it's explained is that Mark Spector regains his health and acquires 3 new personalities. Stephen Grant, a debonair Wall Street genius, and Jake Lockley, a street-smart taxi driver, as well as his own personality, Mark Spector, the mercenary. And all 3 will come together to become Moon Knight. That was all the flashback section to get us the origin out the way, with now the main story beginning with Stephen Grant dictating a case he had just finished as Moon Knight, because apparently that's something he does. On one of the heroin pushers that Moon Knight had taken down earlier, he found a pendant with Bushman's death skull symbol on it, meaning he gets to go after Bushman, who is in New York. So he calls up Frenchie so that they can eventually take the moon copter out after Spector, as Lockley, gets the intel about where Bushman is. This leads Moon Knight into a high-end gambling den, or a jiggle joint as Marlene calls it later. See, you can tell it's high-end by just how bright the pimp suits are. He karates his way through the first wave of goons, but then decides to skip to the boss fight by racing past them into the next loading screen. Barricading himself in the main office, he doesn't see anyone in the room, but the golden dagger that started this whole mess from Selima sits on the desk. Of course, stepping from the shadows is Bushman, made up in his best boogeyman cosplay. As Bushman threatens Moon Knight with a gun, Marlene appears, having followed Mark. But seeing Bushman, she can't help but gasp. That gasp has Bushman fire at Moon Knight, but he dodges it. Marlene, though, not as lucky as Bushman turns and fires on her, shooting her in the side. Enraged, Moon Knight starts to absolutely wail on Bushman, all the while Marlene begging him not to kill Bushman. Tearfully, she's begging him not to become a murderer like Bushman. Apparently she wasn't privy to the fact that Spector was there for all of Bushman's massacres as a mercenary. Anyways, Moon Knight does let go of Bushman, who is very clearly knocked out and probably gonna die of a brain hemorrhage. But they leave. The issue ends with the cops coming to arrest Bushman, as Marlene reassures Moon Knight to never forget the man that he really is. There is so much more to this character that I wish I could go over, but I can't in just a then and now format. So please, if you would like me to do a reader's history similar to how I did the Cloak and Dagger, please donate and let me know. But let's just go with this issue. This was the first time Mark Spector had a real origin story, and it was in his very first issue. I kinda hate it. Good guy mercenary Mark Spector doesn't work when he's written to also be an underling of Bushman. It really comes off as okay, we can be bloodthirsty mercenaries, but I'm gonna complain the whole time. It does get a lot better and fleshed out later on. Most every writer will give a general origin, even in Volume 9, we'll see later. He does generally give an origin, but it's a hiccup when we see how it's played out because Moon Knight, Mark Spector, will not sugarcoat, as it were. He's not going to be like, I didn't like what I was doing at all. He was a bad man who did bad things. But again, it's all fleshed out later. Not to mention, Marlene does switch her tune in less than 3 panels, and overall Mark's death and resurrection takes a page. But I've noticed that was very much how the 70s, early 80s Marvel method went when it came to characters. You would usually have a character introduced in other works to be established enough so that they can have a solo series. Then their first issue would be, here's a quick origin so we can talk about that later. Usually issue 1 was essentially, here's the premise. Frankly, I am absolutely glad that I did get into the character first through West Coast, because this is not a bad first issue, but as an introduction to the character, it's very bare bones. It spends so much time to get us to the present that it's only an overview more than a story proper, like I was saying. However, that was over 200 issues ago, according to Marvel Legacy, so will the now reflect the growth I wanted to see? The Now is from the infamous year 2021, written by Jed MacKay, art by Alessandro Cappuccio, colors by Rochelle Rosenberg, and letters by VC's Corey Petit. In the night, you can hear the sirens call. No Baywatch Nights jokes, got it. Anyways, in the night, a vampire pyramid scheme is trying to send out their new recruits to continue the undead MLM venture. However, Moon Knight crashes through their window because he's Batman. Okay, that's one joke, but trust me, the conclusion for this is gonna probably get a mite long because of that comparison. No, Moon Knight slays the head vampires, giving a very I am the Knight speech, but he looks really cool while doing it, so I can't complain. However, when it comes to kill the new recruits, they plead for their unlives, and he does spare them. At least allowing one, Reese the Vampire, to join the Midnight Mission. What's that? We'll get to that in a moment. The entire story was Mr. Knight retelling the events to his psychologist, Dr. Andrea Sturman. Mr. Knight then brings up his current mission statement. He is taking up the duty of Khonshu after the Age of Khonshu to protect travelers in the night, and he's done so by starting the Midnight Mission, a place for the lost and weary of the city to come to him in the night. I also think that Jed MacKay has one of the best panels when it comes to that whole "but he needs to be Jewish" argument that pops up after the D Plus show because people needed something to complain about. Contradictions are nothing new for him. Anyways, back to expository therapy. I have mine every other Tuesday. But it's time to go over his backstory again. And frankly, after covering the then, I prefer him telling us about it. Mr. Knight does make sure to not sugarcoat that he was a bad guy who did bad things until he went to Slima, grew a conscience, and stood against Bushman and his other American mercenaries. And of course there is the major plot point that no origin can omit, because it's kind of a big deal. He died, and he came back thanks to Khonshu and was the Traveler, the Embracer, the Pathfinder, and of course the Defender. But of course that wasn't the only time he died. Another time was in the East River, because no one should swim in that, and another was when his then headquarters, the Shadow Keep, exploded all around him. But then Dr. Sturman asked the million-dollar question. That's 3 times he's died. Can Moon Knight even die at this point? And the answer? He doesn't know. Later at the Midnight Mission, still dressed in his Mr. Knight suit, he takes a case from a little old lady whose apartment building is being infested with rats. Yes, they're New York City-sized rats, so you gotta make sure to bring the 12 gauge. Okay, it's actually the Spider-Man villain Vermin, who can now clone himself. Good for him. Well, not good for him. What's not good for him, though, is that he's in Moon Knight's domain, so it's either pack up and go, or get the clawed brass knuckles out. But hey, who cares about that action stuff? Let's go to the real action. Therapy time at the mission. Although it's essentially just to cover the Age of Khonshu story, and how Moon Knight is estranged from the god that is now imprisoned by the Asgardians. It actually pairs quite nicely with the next scene, which is Moon Knight going to a clinic being attacked by a supervillain. Except that supervillain is 8-Ball, who I swore was killed off over in Daughters of the Dragon. But hey, it's good to see he's back and being punched in the head by my favorite addition to the Moon Knight mythos, Dr. Badr, who caught 8-Ball trying to steal Oxy from the clinic, but frankly, he's actually here for Moon Knight. For you see, Dr. Badr is not just a doctor. He's, well, I'm not going to say what he is right now because it's a cool reveal later, but he is definitely a part of the cult of Khonshu and admonishes Moon Knight for allowing creatures like vampires to sully the travelers of the night. Don't worry though, we'll put a pin in him for now, because it's time to cut over to the park to talk with Dr. Sturman again. Dr. Sturman tells Mark the story of Brother Cademan, who was considered a simpleton and a dullard until he created a beautiful hymn and became a poet, all thanks to a meeting with God. Now, Sturman is concerned about the fact that while Moon Knight's dissociative identity disorder is treatable, the fact that Knight has made contact with a god, or whatever passes for a god in the Marvel Universe, there's no real way to know what the fundamentals of his mentality are after that. Now, it's actually something that's hinted at and talked about in previous volumes, and I like that it wasn't swept away. In fact, Jed MacKay is actually really good at taking all the previous volumes and just squishing them together and getting the good juices out of it. I'm going to continue on now. While Sturman is hesitant that Moon Knight likes the fact that they're not too sure, Moon Knight wants to trust and he's sick of seeing enemies everywhere. So, he will keep going to the good doctor. And later on, in front of the Midnight Mission, he opens up to Reese, who's finally gotten him a coffee. However, as they talk, across the street, we see a parabolic microphone in a window listening, with pictures of every personality of Moon Knights next to it. And a mysterious figure smiles widely in the darkness, saying that he will break the faith of Moon Knight. Spoilers, is not Bushman like I originally thought it was going to be, but then again, I didn't actually realize that who this dude is was anywhere in the Marvel Universe after Vengeance. And to end the issue, we follow Dr. Batter home, where he prays to Khonshu, because you see, every god has two hands, and even Khonshu has two, which means that it has two fists. Mark Spector, the right hand of Khonshu, has failed, so now it's up to the left fist, the Hunter's Moon, to correct him. Dun dun dun! Short of it, as an issue, it is amazing. The writing, the art, oh my god, have you seen this art? Look at this art! It's phenomenal from the art itself to the colors, and it is just a top-tier book, and another of the fantastic additions to the legacy of Moon Knight. But for a real comparison, let's get into the conclusion. Moon Knight is awesome. That is the ultimate conclusion to make. And frankly, if you didn't know that by now, then now's the time to know that greatness. However, unlike any of the then and nows I've done before, I'll come right out and say it. Moon Knight needed the evolution that being popular over years gave him, to hammer out some of the trouble with the characters. The best way to explain that is actually with the first volume. Bill originally did his drawings of Moon Knight in a very Neil Adams Batman style. With the gadgets and gizmos aplenty, it was a big reason that there was always this undercurrent of, he's just a Batman clone, going around. However, the writing never really supported that. There was always so much of a character there that any writer was able to give their own twist and able to build upon the foundation just the basic premise gave. But it was the evolution of Bill's art, from the Neil Adams traditional awesome into the sketchy, scratchy, inky style that he's best known for now, and what would be a staple of Marvel in the 80s. Yes, it is a microcosm for the character. Doug Moen gave a quick origin to get to the meat of the tales he wanted to tell, which, were actually quite Batman in style, but that's not the point. The point is, that original run created a popularity that would allow more voices to hone in on the specifics and allow for that mostly traditional start to become the bombast that would eventually lead to Jed MacKay having the Midnight Mission and a man trying to better himself. And yes, as someone who's followed this character since I learned to read, I'd actually say that the character is in the best spot creatively that it's ever been. But frankly, that is honestly it for the video. If you agree, disagree, or want to share your personal favorite Moon Knight moments, or even your take on the character, leave a comment below. While you're down there, give a suggestion for the next Then and Now, or donate so I have to talk about the comics you want me to, or I can afford a non-squeaking office chair. More than that, it's free to like, subscribe, and share, so please help the channel grow. We've still got about 750 subs before we can even think about monetizing. More than anything, though, I'm AJ the Comic Archivist, telling you to stay golden, Inklings.